The next thing that I'd like to share with you is that the information today is not a new concept. I won't be giving you really new information. Much of what I'll be saying to you, you'll be shaking your head and nodding because you already know this. What I will be doing is, I gave it myself a note here, is giving you language, new language for very old wisdom. In many other cultures, the things we'll be talking about today are very well known. In this culture, they're not. And so I make this note to remind you not to beat yourselves up for things you didn't know. They say there are things in life there are things that we do know, and we know that we know them, like water is wet and rocks are hard. There are things that we don't know, and we know that we don't know them, like, I don't know astrophysics. But there are also things we don't know, and those are the things that usually get us. And nowhere is that more true than in parenting and in child care. The other thing that I'd like to say is that you will leave here with information today, but have realistic expectations of yourselves about applying it. There's a wonderful book that Dorothy Briggs wrote. She wrote Your Child's Self-Esteem, but she also wrote a book about adult self-esteem called Celebrate Yourself. And in that book, she talks about how when we're trying to change a behavior or develop a new behavior, that we're very much like children who are being potty trained. That first they'll come up to us and say, I peed. And the next step is they'll come up to us and say, I'm peeing. And the next step will be that they'll come up and tell us that they have to go pee. And we go through a very similar process. That first we'll go, I just did it again, the other way. And then we'll go, I'm doing it. And then the next step will be that we'll be able to do it another way. One of the words that you'll be hearing me use in the workshop today is a word called discharge. And you have a whole handout just about discharge. Basically, what discharge is the outpouring or release of feelings in response to an emotional hurt. And discharge can take the form of crying, raging, nervous laughter. Whenever you hear people laughing and no one has said anything funny, that's discharge. That's letting out feelings of nervousness or light fears. Trembling, yawning, these are all ways that we discharge emotions and the feelings that come up as a result of things that happen to us. We were born with the same ability to heal from emotional hurts as we were to heal from the physical hurts that happened to us. Spontaneously, we would cry when something hurt our feelings or something hurt us or made us angry. We would get angry. All of us were born with that. We all have that ability, had that ability, still have it. We can rehabilitate it. And we did that. We always released it. There's a couple more chairs up here if you'd like to come on up front. We would all do that in the beginning. And there are several important things that we need to know about discharging hurts. The first thing that's important to know is that when we get hurt emotionally, our thinking shuts down around that hurt, and we can't think well. And it doesn't come back until we get a chance to discharge those feelings that were associated with that hurt. And the best example that I can offer you of how that works, say you had a confrontation with someone and it was hurtful. And another form of discharge is talking repeatedly about the hurt, telling the story over and over and over. That's another form of discharge. So say we had this confrontation and the next day you told this friend about it and you said, she said this and I said this. And then you saw another friend and you told this friend about it and they said this and I said this. And all of a sudden you go, I should have said this. I should have done that. And what's happened is that by talking about it, we got to discharge the hurt, and our clear thinking came back. And that's what happens for all of us, not just children. That happens for all of us. The other thing that's important to know is that we need the attention of another person while we heal from that hurt. We need someone to pay attention to us and listen to us. And children offer us the very best evidence of the fact that they know this already. If you've ever seen a child fall on the playground, they will often look to see if anyone saw them fall. And if no one saw them fall, they often don't cry. Has anyone ever experienced that? And if someone did see them fall, they will often cry and cry and cry and cry. They know if there's no one there, there's no resource, there's no one to pay attention to them while they cry. So they sometimes will just hold it in. Now, the other important thing to know is the tears we don't cry out, we cry in. And we hold them inside of us. And they stay there until we do cry them out. And it's these undischarged hurts, these uncried tears, that become what we commonly know of as buttons, Those are our buttons. You hear people say, don't push my buttons.
Yeah.
Our buttons are our unhealed hurts. Those are the tears we didn't get to cry. That's the anger we didn't get to let out. So we all have those things. Now, if you can imagine what your physical bodies would look like if every bump, scrape, bruise, cut, anything that's ever happened to us our whole life had not been allowed to heal, what we'd all walk around looking like. For some of us, it wouldn't be a pretty sight. The same thing is true for us on the inside. We all still carry any of the hurts that we got that we did not have the attention and the opportunity to discharge, to release, to let it go. We carry those things. Now, the interesting thing that we know about human beings is that we are like tape recorders. It's as if the day we were born, someone hit record, and every word that was ever said to us, every experience we ever had, everything that ever happened to us is permanently recorded here, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. And it is as if there is some magic that happens when we either have children or work with children. It's as if someone hits play, and it all just comes playing back out again at them, unless we can put something else in there. We are really like computers, it's like garbage in, garbage out. Whatever went in will be what will come out, unless we make a conscious effort to do something different. Now, as I said, we used to discharge spontaneously the minute somebody or something happened that hurt us, until we got interfered with. And I've identified 7 different ways, and you don't really need to write these down because we're going to do an exercise that you'll experience these things, that we got interfered with around letting our feelings out. And the first way that we got shut down and interfered with is that we were invalidated. People told us there's nothing to cry about, there's nothing to be afraid of, and they invalidated us letting out our feelings. The second way that we got interfered with is that we were shamed. We were told, don't be a sissy, be a big girl, be a big boy. The third way is we were threatened. I'll give you something to cry about. Many of us have heard that phrase before. The fourth way that we were interfered with is we were placated. In other words, someone would do anything to fix it. I'll get you a new one, I'll get you a better one, I'll fix it, whatever it is. Someone would just try to fix it to get us to stop crying. The fifth one is that people would distract us from our feelings. Let's go get a cookie, let's go do this, let's go watch a show, just distract us away from having those feelings. The sixth one is that we were isolated. People would say, go to your room. I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear it, just go to your room. Or we were just plain ignored. That was the seventh way, just plain ignored when we were having all these feelings that we needed to let out. Now, it was actually kind of gender specific. For little boys, it was kind of okay to be angry, but not to cry. And for little girls, it was kind of okay to cry, but definitely not to be angry. And as a result of that, we have many angry adult women walking around who've been stuffing it for years. And we also have many men whose feelings were taken away from them so young that they have a very hard time getting in touch with their feelings. It's very difficult for them. And that was done to them by interfering with them. Now, the problem with interfering with children's discharge is that it causes several things to happen. First of all, they stop trusting their feelings. And all of us used to trust our feelings, but we stopped trusting our feelings. We can rehabilitate that ability to trust our feelings. And I know that we've all had the experience. This little voice tries to tell us something. Don't leave it there, the dog will knock it over. But we leave it there, and the dog knocks it over, and we say, why did I listen to myself? We all have those. We stop trusting those feelings. We need to start listening to those feelings again. But that's what happens for children, and it puts them in danger when they can't trust their own feelings because they've been invalidated. Now, the second thing that happens when we interfere with children, they have to store them. They have to keep them inside. And in order to do that, they have to develop control behaviors. They have to develop behaviors that will allow them to control those feelings and keep them inside. Now, when we interfere with children, the message, don't express your feelings, becomes the message, don't feel your feelings. And the message, I can't accept your feelings, becomes, I can't accept you. And children desperately need to be accepted by us. So in order to be accepted by us, they will learn those control behaviors. So the first part of the work that we're going to do for the workshop is going to be a listening exercise. And this is the way a listening exercise works. It's not a conversation. Most of the time we have conversations with people and one person is talking and that triggers something that we think about. We're just waiting for them to shut up so we can jump in and put in our 2 cents worth. Well, when we're doing that, when we're thinking about what we're going to say, we're not hearing really what they're saying. And we all need more practice at listening to children and listening to what they want to tell us. So I have a little timer here. We're each going to get a turn. That's how it works. So we're going to pair off 2 by 2 by 2 all the way around the room so everyone has a partner. Between you and your partner, you will decide. This is why we shook hands and got to know each other so we'd know who we were working with. And you will decide between the two of you who will go first. And the first person will talk, and the second person will simply listen. Not commiserate, not agree, not disagree, not give advice, judgment, nothing. You can smile and nod to acknowledge that the person is talking, but please try to refrain from speaking also. You'll get your turn when the 2 minutes is up, and then your partner will completely listen to you, and you will get to talk. And this is what I would like you to talk about. Think about when you were a young child and you tried to let your feelings out. How did the adults in your world respond to you? What did they do when you tried to be angry or you needed to cry or you had feelings that you wanted to let out? And the purpose for this exercise is so that we can recognize what our tendency will be, because however we were interfered with will be the ways we will tend to interfere with children because of what we have stuffed inside of us. So that's the purpose of the exercise, to just kind of identify what happened when we were a young child and we tried to discharge, release our feelings. How did the adults in our life respond to us? Any questions just about the exercise or how to do it? Okay. Logistically, with this many people, it will probably make the most sense if we can just pair off with the person who is closest to us and hopefully come out with an even number. If we end up with an odd number and someone doesn't have a partner, I'd be willing to partner with someone up front here so everyone gets listened to. So let's take a minute just to get organized.
How can you listen and know it?
That's one of those exercises that could really be 5 minutes. I'd like to ask a question. Did anyone in the room grow up in a family where it was completely okay to express any feelings that you had, that was always okay? Okay. There's always a couple. I tell people we have a support group for people like you.
I'm able to do that.
The rest of us. What did we experience?
Stop that crying.
Stop that crying? Just yell out some of them. Not even acknowledged, yes. You're shamed. Yes.
If I say the sky is purple, it's purple, and you can see it blue.
Yes. Yes.
Do what I tell you not.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So we get the picture, right? Most of us were not freely allowed to have our feelings or to express our feelings. So what we had to learn to do was keep them inside if we wanted to be accepted. So in order to do this, in order to keep those feelings in, it's actually, the best analogy I could think of is similar to bladder control. You know, when children learn that it's not acceptable by us for them to just release their bladders wherever they happen to be when they're full, they gain control over those muscles so they can wait for the appropriate place. And it's a similar thing to getting control over our emotions and not letting them just out when we feel them there. And some of the kinds of control behaviors that children develop are nail biting, hair twirling, distracting themselves, isolating themselves. They learn to do it to themselves before someone does it to them. And an interesting part that I've just recently added, because I've seen it in my daycare, is that very young children use their comfort items to stuff it. They will literally stuff their blanket in their mouth to stuff those feelings and keep them in, their pacifier, their lovey, their bubby, their teddy, whatever it is. And we help them. The minute they start to cry, we run across the room to get them their loved thing so that we can give it to them and help them to stop crying. Because we have been conditioned to think that if we can stop the crying, we can stop the hurting. And what's really so is that when we stop the crying, we stop the healing. And that's so different than what most of us have grown up hearing and experiencing. So what I do in the daycare when a young child who does have a comfort item gets hurt or cries, I don't tell them they can't have it, but I do tell them that we can have it in a minute so that they can let a little bit of that out before they stuff it in with whatever it is that they love and comfort themselves with. Because they do need comfort, but they also need to let a little bit of it out. And so I just tell them, yes, you can have it in a minute, and just let them cry for a few minutes before they do that. Now, as a result of stuffing it in, all of us are carrying every bit of whatever we didn't let out from a whole lifetime, whether it's, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years worth of hurt that we're just carrying because we didn't get to let it out. And once we become adults, control behaviors are not enough. We have to just plain numb it out, not feel it, because it's just too painful. And the kinds of behaviors that we adopt to numb it out are excessive eating, smoking, drinking, excessive television watching, shopping, working, anything that we can do to distract ourselves from that pain that we all carry. Now, for our children, we want to make it safe so that they don't have to carry all of that their whole life. And once children have learned to control it, once they've learned to keep it in, the only time they'll let it out, if they can control it, is when it's safe, when they know that they're in a safe place. And this is the answer, mysteriously, to why people always say children are worse with their parents. Children are safest, usually, with their parents. And so that's where they let their feelings out. They may go with Aunt Mary for the day and spend the whole day with her, and Aunt Mary brings them home and gives you this glowing report about how wonderful your children were all day, and she's barely to her car when it just all breaks loose, and they're crying and they're yelling, and everything comes out because they're home now where it's safe. So we'll get it all. That's them telling us, I trust you, I know you're going to love me no matter what. No matter if you see all my icky feelings coming out, I know you'll still love me, so this is my safe place to do it. So in a way, it's kind of a backdoor compliment when our children do that with us. The same is true for us as adults. There could be an accident, a death, some kind of major crisis, and we would be, according to Western standards, holding up just fine, stiff upper lip and all that, until our safe person walks through the door, whether it's our husband, wife, mother, brother, sister, best friend, whoever represents safety to us walks through that door and we fall apart. Now it's safe for us to just let out all those feelings that we've been holding back and just not letting out. Now we can do that when it's safe. So one of the things probably many of you have heard the song, We Only Hurt the Ones We Love. What that can translate to is we only discharge with the people we're the safest with. We don't go to work and yell at our boss, but we come home and yell at our family because we know that we're safe there and that it's safe to do that. When children have undischarged hurts, when they're carrying things, it affects their behavior and it also affects their thinking. So if we want to help children be able to process each little hurt that comes along, we need to find a way of letting them know that we're a safe place to do that. Now, one of the things that I always remember to say to people, this does not apply to infants. When infants are crying, we need to pick them up right away because it's the only way they have to communicate to us. So even if it is discharged, remember we said they need someone to be with them. So whether it's out of need or out of discharge, the response would still be the same. We wouldn't just let a baby stay in their crib and say, oh, they're discharging. They must have some fears or something that's happened to them. We wouldn't do that. Now, most of us find it very, very difficult to be with children when they're crying or when they're angry. And there's two reasons why we find it so difficult to do that. One is our conditioning. We think we need to do something to fix it. We need to stop it. We need to just get them to stop doing that. The other thing that makes it so difficult is their crying or anger triggers all of our old unhealed hurts, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, and it's very painful. It's literally physically uncomfortable, and we just want them to stop, and we will do any manner of things to get them to stop, when what they really need is just for us to be a safe place for them to have their feelings. So in order for us to try to work on being that safe place, we need to look at what is it we're feeling when they are discharging. Not what do we think about it, not what do we want to do about it, but in the gut, what are we feeling when that's happening, when we're with a child, when we're confronted with a child to be with and they're crying or they're screaming, what do we feel? Now, some of the answers that I've gotten on this, I feel angry, I feel frustrated, I feel helpless, I want to cry too, I want to whack them. There's just all kinds of responses, feeling responses that people have to being with children when they're crying. So I would like us to do another 2-minute exercise. You can choose your same partner. Maybe the other one can go first this time. and have you spend just 2 minutes talking about what do I feel when I am with a child who's crying. Any questions about that? I'll call out the time, and we'll go ahead and do that. What do we feel when children are crying? Helpless? Frustration? We want to fix it.
Hurt.
Pardon?
Hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Anger.
Anger. Yes, we feel anger.
Anger at the parents, though. Of the children. Right.
Anger at the parents?
Let them get away with it.
Anything else? One of the things that it's important to notice, too, it's always harder to listen to our own children cry than it is to listen to someone else's children cry. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that it always feels like a criticism to us, like if we were being good parents, they wouldn't be crying, you know. And one really important thing to understand about discharge is that feelings are not always facts. That's a really important thing to remember. What a conflict is when two people are discharging at each other at the same time. Feelings are not always facts. So when our children say to us, you never take me anywhere, you never buy me anything, you never, 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 instead of us being able to just listen, we feel so attacked that we feel we need to defend ourselves. So we give them this list of all the things we've recently done with them and all the things places we've recently taken them, because we're hearing their feelings as facts. And the reality is they really know what we've done with them and for them, but that's just how they're feeling right now. So I know when it's my own children crying, I have to do this kind of little mantra: the crying is the healing, it's not the hurting. The crying is the healing. That's the most important thing you can walk out of here with today, is that the crying is the healing, it's not the hurting. Unless the hurt is right in this current minute, you know, their fingers are jammed in the door, the brick is on their foot, whatever it is, unless it is right in this current second, then the crying is the healing. It's how they're trying to heal from their hurt.
Do you think sometimes we feel bad because we know that we're the ones doing the hurting? Do you think that would sometimes bring out...
It could possibly enter into it if indeed we are really hurting, but usually the reason we feel bad is our own hurt. I mean, there's two parts. There will be our empathy for their pain, but there will also be our pain that's very real and being triggered by that. Now, if we're deciding that we want to be that for children, that we want to be that safe place where we can just rise above our own feelings and just let those feelings out, accept that they're not facts, that they're just feelings, there are a couple of things that we need to accept in order to do that. And the biggest one that we have to accept, which is the hardest one, is that there is no such thing as no reason to cry. There's no such thing. If someone is crying, they have a reason. It doesn't matter that we don't know what it is. There's no such thing as no reason to cry. We cannot possibly make a judgment that another person does or does not have a reason to cry. And the reason that we cannot possibly make that judgment is that there is not one of us in the whole world who knows what it feels like to be inside someone else's skin. We cannot know that. We have not had all their same experiences. We don't have all their same hurts. We don't have their same level of sensitivity. We don't have their same temperament. No one can possibly judge that another person doesn't have a reason to cry. If they're crying, there's a reason. The other thing that we have to accept is that crying is not misbehavior. And we have viewed crying as misbehavior for many, many, many years. Crying is not misbehavior. Crying is healing behavior. And that's very difficult for us to accept in view of the conditioning that we've had, that we just want them to stop crying. So what that means is that we validate all feelings. We accept all feelings. Feelings aren't right or wrong. They just are. It's just how that person feels. It's not a fact. It's a feeling. And when we do that, when we accept all feelings, we have to remember that accepting all feelings does not mean we accept all behaviors. You know, it's not okay that a child hits another child over the head because they're angry. We can accept that they're angry, but we cannot accept that way of expressing angry behavior. So it then becomes our job to teach children acceptable ways of having their feeling, not judging their feelings and telling them they are right or wrong, but accepting their feelings and showing them ways that are acceptable to express those feelings. Now, one of the most difficult feelings for us to respond to is anger. And the reason for that is that most of us were not allowed to have our anger, and most of us did not have models of acceptable ways of expressing our anger. So it's the one we have kind of the least experience with in terms of working with children. But we can teach them that, yes, you can hit the mad pillow. If you're really angry, you can punch this pillow, or you can hit the table with a rolled up newspaper. It's okay, I can see that you're really angry, and this is what you can do. Now, it won't be enough for us just to tell them that they can do that. We need to model what we do with anger. When children swear, it's usually because they've seen someone who was angry swear. They slam the cupboard door and they swear, and they say, oh, that's how you do anger. They're constantly looking at us as a model of how to be a human being. The quote that's in the book there comes from another workshop that I submitted that wasn't accepted, which is about that we are the curriculum every day with children. We are the curriculum. They are looking at us to see what is it to be a human being. So we need to find acceptable ways of expressing our anger so that they can literally see from us as a model what you do with anger and how you express anger. But again, that's very difficult for us to do. We try to hide it or stuff it or do something else because we didn't get to do that. So we ourselves will have to learn ways of expressing anger. And one of the best ways is learning to use I statements. The part that does damage about expressing anger is the attack. If we attack someone's dignity, if we attack their self-esteem as a way of expressing our anger by calling names and telling them that they're bad, that's not an acceptable way for us to express our anger. But we can express our anger without attacking and hurting someone, and we can also teach children to do that. When we're trying to help children with this, basically what we're doing is facilitating discharge. We're not only being a safe place for them to discharge, we're actually helping them do it. And some people have said to me, well, if you just let children have their feelings all the time, what kind of adults are they going to grow up to be who just go around expressing whatever they feel whenever they want? I said, probably pretty healthy, I don't know. But one of the things that's important to know, no matter how many messages we give our children or our daycare children, it's okay to have your feelings, they are going to get enough messages in the wide world that it's not okay to have your feelings, that they will rapidly develop control over them and only let them out when it's safe. I mean, you hear 3-year-olds saying to each other, sissy, be a big boy. They've already internalized those messages and are giving them out. So we don't ever have to worry that people will just go around having their feelings all the time, although what a healthier culture we might be if we could learn to do that and learn to accept it. So one of the things that I see facilitating discharge, it's like taking out a splinter. If I get a splinter in my finger and I don't take it out, what happens? Festers. Every time I touch something, it hurts. So if you could think of an emotional hurt as a splinter, it's not much fun to take out a splinter. It's very unpleasant, but we don't leave it in there just because it's unpleasant to take it out. It's not always going to be pleasant to facilitate a child discharging, to be with them when they're crying, to stay with them when they're having a tantrum. But until that comes out, they are not going to be able to heal that hurt, and they will continue to carry it with them. So if we think about, what are emotional hurts? Feeling left out is an emotional hurt. Fear is an emotional hurt. Disappointment, frustration, loss. These are all emotional hurts that we all experience. Now, for children, the one they seem to experience most and respond to most is the word no. For children, the word no is a loss because of their sense of time. There's not later, there's not tomorrow, there's only now. So it feels like if it's no for now, it's no forever. So this doesn't mean that we never say no to children. It simply means that when we must set limits, when we must say no, we must also allow them the space to respond to the no without changing what we're doing. And just let them discharge the disappointment of the no, and then they can go forward. Instead of having that no influence us, other than to just give them attention and say, I can see you're really disappointed that the answer is no, but the answer is still no. Now, an example of that would be, say you made cupcakes for dinner and your 4-year-old comes in the kitchen, sees the cupcakes, wants one now. And you've decided, no, we're not going to have the cupcakes now. So he throws himself on the floor and starts screaming and crying. And we don't need to say, well, maybe you could have a half a cupcake, or we don't need to fix it. We can just say, I can see you're really disappointed that you can't have the cupcake now, and just let him cry and let him get the feelings out, and then they can move forward. Now, that incident brings us to the most hot topic there is temper tantrums. All right. All you have to do is say the word temper tantrum, and you can bring parents from miles to listen to what you have to say. It's the one place where most of us feel like, I don't know what to do. And there's a lot of misinformation about temper tantrums. Even the most current early childhood literature that I have read tells us to ignore temper tantrums. That's what we've all been taught. And what temper tantrums are spillover. It's just spillover of stored up emotion. In the same way I can't put 9 ounces of water into an 8-ounce cup, we can't put 9 ounces of hurts into an 8-ounce child. It's going to spill over. And that's what a temper tantrum is. It's never about what we saw happen. It's never about what we think the temper tantrum is about. Instead of it being about what we saw happen, it's about all the things we didn't see happen. All the little frustrations and hurts that built up until this last one was just the last straw. The cookie broke, that's it. And it just all comes spilling out into a temper tantrum. And temper tantrum is not misbehavior, it's not manipulation, it's just spillover. And what they need from us when that's happening is for us to just be with them, keep them safe, don't let them hurt themselves, their surroundings, or us, and let them dump it all out. Just let, if you're in a grocery store or something, you might want to pick them up and take them out to the car so they can have it, where they can have a little dignity about it, and the whole grocery store is waiting to see what you're going to do about it. But the message they need from us is just, I'll stay with you, I'll be with you. It is pointless to talk to a child who's having a temper tantrum. They can't hear us. We need to just be there for them. Now, has anyone ever been with a child who's had like a 20, 30, 40-minute tantrum, right to the wall, and then it's finally done? What are they like when it's over with? Exhausted. What else? Thirsty. What else? A different person. My experience is that they are loving, they are cooperative, they are cheerful. My experience of being with children all these years is that that's their true nature. That when children don't have unmet needs and they don't have something that's hurting them, that's who they are. And I call it the rainbow after the rain. After we have the big storm and it's all over, that's who they are. That's that rainbow. And they're just incredible to be with. And it's so good for them after they've emptied it out. I've only been working with this information for about 6 years, and my youngest daughter's 17, and she used to have some pretty amazing tantrums. But I did catch on to the pattern. If there had been several days that we hadn't had a tantrum, I'd know one was brewing. So, we can just know it's just spillover. When they learn to hold it, they hold it in, and then it builds up, and then it has to spill over. Now, the other way that buildup will come out is through whining, our favorite behavior. Whining is what I call leaking. There's a buildup there. It's not enough to quite really spill over, so it just sort of leaks out here and there with whining. And what whining really, the best response that I know of to whining is just to pick them up. What they're saying is, I need you, I need something, I need somebody. That's what whining is about. And if we just pick them up, it will either let them just cry and cry it out, or it'll just kind of glue them back together and they can go on. So I'd like to just share with you a couple of examples of facilitating discharge, of ways that we can facilitate children having their feelings. And the first, and one that most of us deal with if we're doing daycare every day, is drop off in the morning. And when children cry about being dropped off in the morning. Now, if you think about it, the parent is the beloved. The parent is the one the child loves the most, that they would rather be with than anyone else in the world. And it doesn't matter if they like me, it doesn't matter if we're going to have fun at daycare. That moment of parting is sad for them. And it is completely appropriate for them to cry at that moment. And we need to let them and validate them and give them permission to do that. Now, all of my parents have taken this workshop, so they all know this. And I have one even that she'll come in the morning and say, are you fine, or do you need to cry with Pam? And he'll say, I need to cry with Pam. And I'll just hold him, and he'll cry for about 5 minutes, and then he'll say, I'm going to go play now. Or he'll say, I'm fine. It depends on how their night was, how their morning was, whatever's going on for them. But if I, took him from the mom and did what we've been trained to do, which is, jiggle him and jolly him and say, oh, let's go get a muffin. It's okay. Mommy will be back later. And we do our whole our whole repertoire, what does the child have to do? They have to stuff it, because I'm giving them the message it's not okay to have these feelings. So they stuff it. Then 10 minutes later, they've built this beautiful tower and someone knocks it over. So now they not only need to cry about the tower, they need to cry about saying goodbye to mom, because that's stuffed in there. It's stored, it's stayed in there, and now there's an opportunity for it to come out. So if we want children to be able to stay current, we need to just give them permission and say, it's really sad when mom leaves. That makes you sad, doesn't it? And just let them have that feeling and be with them and give them attention while they have that feeling, and then they can just let it go. Now, sometimes facilitating discharge will feel like rubbing salt in the wound, like we're making it worse. And really what we're doing, we're just making it safer. I had a little girl once who was about 4, and she didn't usually cry anymore, and it was time to come to daycare. But this one day, we were already out in the play yard, and she was crying coming up the road. I could hear her. And it turned out that she was going to bring her Barbies that day, and her Barbie clothes, and all the 50 million little teeny plastic accessories. And she had them all in a box by the door, and they somehow got out the door without them. And halfway to daycare realized they didn't have them with them, and Dad had an appointment, didn't have time to go back. She was pretty upset. So Dad explained to me, and he left, and I said, do you want to come sit with me and tell me about it? So I took her on my lap, and I said, what Barbies were you going to bring? And she told me, the names of them. And I said, what clothes were you going to bring? And she's like, the blue dress and the gold shoes and the radio and the little tennis racket. And, she just, I just kept saying, and what else? And what else? And she just sobbed and told and sobbed and told. And after about 10 minutes, she said, I'm going to go swing now. It was over. It was emptied out. It was done. She did not have to carry that around with her all day. It made an incredible difference for her to just have a safe place for me to say, I accept everything you feel about this, and it's okay. Another little quick one, when Mom had told her daughter she'd buy her a Tootsie Pop before they came to daycare. She was only coming for the afternoon, and they totally forgot until they were driving up our road, and so, of course, they weren't going to go back and get one, and she was very upset. And she said, Mom, did you buy me a Tootsie Pop? And she forgot. And I said, oh, what color were you going to get? And she said, purple. And that was it. She just needed somebody to know how bad she wanted that lollipop, and it was going to be a purple one. The next example that I'd like to share with you is a personal example, and I have permission from the people involved in this to share it with you. And I've probably done this workshop 50 times, and I've still never gotten through it without it getting to me a little bit. So if it does, it's okay. I feel like this is a safe place for me to have my feelings. This example involves another child in my daycare. She was about 5 years old when this happened, and I had literally known her since held her the day she was born, because I was friends with her parents. And we had a very close family relationship. Her mom was like a second mom to my youngest daughter. My youngest daughter babysat for her, so we knew each other very well. And one day they brought her to daycare and told me that they had told her the day before that they were getting a divorce, and that she hadn't cried. She hadn't really responded at all. And since both parents had done the workshop, they knew discharge should be coming and were concerned that it hadn't come, and just wanted me to be aware of that. So we started out the morning. We were going to do Play-Doh, and the little girl went around and gathered up all the cookie cutters and the dishes and everything that we use when we get out Play-Doh, and she had gathered them in front of her and had her arms kind of around them and keeping them all to herself. And the other kids were complaining, that she wasn't sharing. And so I said, that was really nice of you to go and gather everything up, but those are for all of us to share, and we need to share them. And as soon as I spoke to her, she started to cry. She came over and sat in my lap and just started to cry, and I said, can you tell me what's hurting you? And she just started, and she said, my daddy's moving out. I don't want him to go, and I'm going to miss him, and I want him to stay and be my daddy, and just cried and cried and cried. And I was sitting there holding her, and tears are just rolling down my cheeks. And one of the other daycare kids said, Pam, you're crying. And I said, well, it really hurts when you see somebody that you care about hurting. But that wasn't the whole story. So I held her, and she talked a little more about it, and she cried some more. And after about 10 minutes, she said, I'm going to go play Play-Doh now. So she had been able to get a little bit of it out, as much as she could manage right then. And the way that my house is set up, I have an addition built onto my house, so I have a daycare refrigerator and an upstairs refrigerator, and every once in a while I have to run up and get a stick of butter or whatever. And so I ran up to get something, and the phone rang, so I answered it right there, and it was the little girl's dad calling to find out how she was doing. And so I explained to him what had just happened and told him, yes, she did finally cry about it. And I was also telling him how hard it was for me to sit there and hold her. And I homeschool my children, and my youngest daughter was home. I knew she was up because I could hear the shower going when I was on the phone with this dad. And, I just told him, I said, it just so reminded me of when my youngest daughter, how she was when her dad and I got a divorce, and it was so painful and it was so hard. And I know I was sitting there holding her and just reliving all of that, and it was just so hard. So I hung up with him, and I looked up, and my daughter was standing there. She was out of the shower, and she'd heard the whole conversation, and she was crying. And she just came over and hugged me, and she said, "Mom, I'm so sorry that I was so mean to you then." She said, "I just knew that it hurt, and I was unhappy." So we just kind of held each other and cried a little bit. So then I went back downstairs to the daycare, and the phone rang again, and it was the little girl's mom. And she was wanting to know how it was going, so I told her everything that had happened up to that point, including what had happened with my daughter. So by the time I got off the phone, she was crying. And so a few minutes later, my daughter came downstairs, and she went over to the little girl that she knew very well, and she said, "How are you today?" And she said, "I'm sad today." And she said, "Why are you sad, honey?" And she just started telling the story again the exact same way, because my daddy's moving out, and I'm going to miss him, and I want him to stay there and be my daddy. And my daughter, who this was like 7 years later, said, "I was just about your age when my daddy moved out, and he'll always be your daddy, and he'll always do things with you, and he'll love you, and it won't always feel this bad." And to me, that's just such a poignant example how if I had treated this child like she was a discipline problem, that she was being selfish and not sharing the cookie cutters, what an injustice that would have been to her, because she had all this hurt that was just brimming up there and waiting for a safe place to come out. So we need to always question when children act any way, what's causing this behavior, either what's hurting them or what do they need that they don't have. The whole focus of the 7-week workshop that I do with parents is called The Needs of Children. And what it's about is the fact that children don't always have the language to tell us what they need, so they act it out with their behavior. And that what we need to learn to do is to decode that behavior, to figure out what that behavior is telling us, and then we can meet the need instead of just reacting to the behavior. Now, another thing that happens, and I'm sure many of you heard this expression growing up, cruising for a bruising. Anybody ever hear that expression growing up? Well, children actually do something that's similar to that. I call it looking for discharge. And it's when, it's not quite 9 ounces, but it's not quite ready for spillover, they will push for a limit. And I know we all have days when we feel like the children in our care or our children are pushing us, just push for a limit. And we back up because we don't want the limit to come that we know is going to make them trigger over. And what we need to do is just plain give the limit. When you try 2 or 3 times to fix it, you give them a cookie, it breaks, they're upset, so you want to give them a new cookie. No, they don't want a new cookie, they want that one, but they want it not to be broken. When it's like that, that's a child looking for discharge. They're looking for a chance to just let it spill over. And we can help them with that. We can just say, set the limit, and know that once they get to empty out and once they get to spill over, then they're going to feel a whole lot better. The other thing that happens that I think is important to mention, and we could do a whole workshop just on this, and I'll ask you to refrain from questions because we really could spend a whole afternoon on it, but I just want to mention it as something for you to take home and think about, is that when children hurt other children, children hurting other children are hurting, or they wouldn't have hurt another child. It's not been my experience that children are vicious. If children hit, it's for one of 2 reasons. Either they're being trained to hit because someone is hitting them, it's a learned behavior, their parent, their sibling, a playmate, someone's hitting them, or they just plain lose control. Young children have a very limited amount of control and capacity for frustration. So, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old and this little thing has happened and that little thing's happened and they're about on the edge and then somebody just really comes after them, they don't have the language to say, "Excuse me, you're in my space, could you please move?" They're just going to push. They're just going to do whatever they can to change the situation. So we need to really remember that when a child hurts another child, they are hurting. I think timeout most often gets reserved for when children hurt other children. In other instances, we redirect their behavior. We do all manner of different, hopefully positive things. But it seems like when we use timeout is when someone has hurt someone else. And timeout has been really distorted. I mean, the original meaning of timeout was like in sports, let's take a break, let's think of a new plan of action here. And now it's just like standing in the corner. I mean, I hear it used like, that's it, 5 minutes in the timeout chair. It's a punishment. There's just no two ways about it. It's a punishment. And when children have lost control, the last thing they need from us is to be isolated. Control, I mean, it has kind of a bad, losing control has a bad name in our culture. It's like, oh my God, they're out of control. When if you think about it in its literal sense, out of control, I'm out of bread, I'm out of milk, I'm out of control. I have none left. I've used it up. It's gone. And that's what happens for children. They use it up and then it's gone, and then they need us to lend them some of ours. They need us to help them through that situation. So what I usually do in the daycare, if a child hurts another child, I deal with the child who got hurt and, help them, let them discharge, do whatever they need to help them. And then I take the other child on my lap and say, what's hurting you that made you hurt someone else? And usually one of two things will happen. They'll either just completely fall apart and start crying, and the hurt will start to come out, or they will go into a total rage and just get away from me, I don't want you near me, I hate you, and just all of this anger will start coming out and coming out and coming out. There's a book I'd like to recommend to you. I'm not recommending that you do this, but I am recommending the book to you, and the book is called Holding Time. And it's by Dr. Martha Welch. And in that book she explains how much children need to be held every day, how much they need to have lap time and to be with us. And she also explains a process by which, if you are comfortable with it and feel that you can do it, that you can hold children through a temper tantrum. If you feel comfortable with the process and you know the child and the child trusts you. Like I said, I'm not endorsing that you do it, because the only way that you can be a safe place is if you feel okay about it. If you feel that you're violating the child, you will not be a safe place and it will not work anyway. But I do recommend reading the book because it's just filled with some really wonderful information about how much children need to be held and how much they need that closeness. So, Dr. Martha Welch. Okay, one of the things that it's important to know is that very often children will have 20 minutes worth of discharge when you only have 10 minutes worth of attention. That you just can't, they'll have a lot of stuff stored up and they'll just want to go on and on and on, and we just can't, either because another child needs our attention or we have to be the doctors in 10 minutes. We just can't always do it. So if we're going to get into it, it's important that we know that there's a way to get out of it, because we just won't always be able to give them the amount of time they need. And the worst that will happen is it'll go back into storage and it'll come out again later with something else. And the one form of interference when children are discharging that doesn't do damage or doesn't give them negative messages is distraction. Because we can really only have our attention in one place at one time. So if their attention is inside where the hurt is stored, what we can do is bring their attention outside. So we might say, how many buttons on my shirt, or how many colors in this picture. Just bring their attention out from where the hurt is into the current present reality where the hurt isn't. And again, it will just stay there and be stored. And we can, move forward. Now sometimes it'll be so intense, even if you take your attention away, they'll still continue. And that relates back to the temper tantrum thing. Now, it depends on what your goal is, how you would respond to it. If your goal is to get them to stop, then ignoring them works. That's the advice we've been given. To ignore them works because they don't have the attention of another person. If our goal is to help them heal from that hurt, then ignoring them is the last thing we want to do. We want to stay with them, pay attention to them, and let them get it out. So that's why the discrepancy about those two pieces of advice. It depends on what our goal is, what we want to do. Now, there are times when it's just very, very hard for us to listen. And very often that will be because it's triggering a specific, if we were the one that was picked on, if we were the one that was bullied, it is so hard to listen to a child cry about being bullied, because we have so much empathy for their pain and so much of that exact same pain stored inside of us. It's very difficult for us to do that. So in order for us to have free attention to give to children while they're discharging, we have to empty out some of our own stuff. Now, the definition of free attention is being able to listen to someone else discharge without having to discharge yourself. So if someone came up to me and started telling me about when their mother died, I could listen to them for a long time because my mother hasn't died. I'm not trying to heal that hurt myself. so I could listen to them. But if someone came up and started telling me about their root canal, I would want to tell them about my root canal, you know. And I'll give you an example of this. Has anyone ever had a dog that died? Okay. If I started telling you about when my dog King died, you wouldn't be able to wait for me to shut up so you could tell me about when your dog died. Because I have identified myself, first of all, as a safe person, because you know I know how that feels, because I experienced that. And two, my very mentioning it immediately triggered all of the unhealed hurt you still carry around that loss. And we all have that. It's estimated that it takes 200 hours of crying with the attention of another person to heal the loss of a significant loved one. So that gives us some clue about how much all of us are carrying. It would be the same thing. There are many common human experiences. How many people have ever had a car accident? You know, if I told you about when I told my Toyota, you would want to tell me about your car accident, because we are all always looking for a place to let some of that hurt out. So whenever you hear people being irrational, you know they're discharging. Whenever you hear people yelling, whatever they're doing, they're discharging. And the definition of crazy is trying to be rational with someone who's totally irrational. We can only be rational with someone after we let them be irrational. So to tell children, you know, try to talk to them when they're having a temper tantrum or when they're crying, it doesn't work because they can't hear us. And they can only think well again once they've discharged the hurt, once they have let it out and let it go. So the way that we get free attention is to have that same kind of safety that we want to offer to children. The Healing the Feeling Child workshop is based on reevaluation counseling or co-counseling. Are any of you familiar with it or have heard those terms? It's a form of peer counseling, and what happens is you just exchange time. So we might agree that we'll meet at 7 o'clock. Instead of 2 minutes like what we were doing here, I'll listen to you for a half an hour, and then you listen to me for a half an hour. And the agreement is total confidentiality, so that there's the safety to have your feelings. And when it's my half hour, I can cry, I can scream, I can be totally irrational, I can be angry, I can be sad, I can talk on and on and on about how whatever it was that hurt me. And then when my time is up, and you're not going to give me advice, you're not going to judge me, you're not going to think anything about me, you know that facts, feelings aren't facts. And just listen, and then when it's reversed, and I'll just listen to you. And what happens is we get to start emptying that stuff out. You know, if children have a teacup, we have a lake. We have had a lot more years and a lot more hurts to store in there to get triggered by children's feelings when they start letting them go. Now, an example would be if, say there was a box factory that manufactured 100 boxes every single day, and every day a truck came up and took the boxes away. If all of a sudden the truck stopped coming, but the box factory continued to manufacture boxes, what would happen? It would eventually become so jammed up with boxes that it couldn't function. And this is what happens for many of us. We start out life with a worldview like this, and this little hurt happens and we don't get to heal from it. And this little hurt happens and we don't get to heal from it until it closes right in like this. And the only way we start to get some free attention and get that intelligence back that was wrapped up in that hurt is to start discharging it, is to start letting it go. And the way that we do that is we set up listening partnerships with people to do this listening exercise so that we can let go of some of that. Now, there's nowhere that I can think of that it's more important to do this than as daycare providers. We are so isolated. Many days we don't have someone taller than this to talk to all day long. And what happens is we end up dumping it on our families. But if we set up listening partnerships with each other where at 5:32 or whatever time we close, we could just call up and say, can you listen to me for 5 minutes? Yes, go for it. And we just unload, just vent, just release. Let everything that was hard for us about that day, just let it out and let it out. And the more we let it out, the better we can think. When we call up a friend for advice, we don't really want their advice. What we really want from them is for them to listen to us. And if you think of who the people are who are most popular in life are the people who are good listeners, the people who will just let us tell our story and tell our story and tell our story. And that's what we all need from each other. Now, we cannot protect children from every hurt that will happen to them in their life, but we can help them heal from every hurt that happens to them in their life if we understand the process and we're willing to go through the uncomfortableness of just letting it heal by remembering that the crying is the healing, it's not the